We said, okay, well, if we can't rely on traditional form of funding, what can we rely on? What can we create? So we had to look around and we said, okay, looking at the world economically speaking, right, in terms of economic populations, how is it broken up and where is it interesting? And so approximately 4 billion people on the planet, 50%, live in what I would call fragile populations, which means income is not steady, it's not very high. What's earned on a daily basis is spent on the very basics of food, shelter, security, etc. And it's lived day to day. And then the other end of the spectrum is what I would call really the capital population. And that's the people who have access either directly themselves or through their organizations, etc., to excess capital. And that's really about 80 million people, the global 1%, if you will, because it's about excess capital that can be invested into these fragile areas. It's not capital that's tied up in people's houses, their pension plans, their cars, their families. I mean, that's those families need that, right? It's what can be used beyond. And not enough of it, in my opinion, gets released. And again, there are great families doing great things in these areas. But when you look at compared to all the capital in the world and what gets actually to the end user, it's too small, frankly, what's available today. But then there's 4 billion people in between there. And I think that's a really interesting population. It's often referred to as the working class population or middle class population. I like to think of it as a consumer population. So, what's interesting about these 4 billion people is they spend way more money than everybody else combined on daily consumer goods and services. So not capital assets like cars and houses, but literally clothing and food and insurance and banking and mobile phones and going for dinner, etc. In fact, they spend $44 trillion a year, which is two times the US GDP or bigger than the GDP of US, China, Japan, and Germany combined. Where does that money go? Where do the profits from what everyday working people spend go? And does it move through the entire economy? And what we've seen is it really doesn't. It moves through part of the economy as a tendency to get stuck. And this is what I mean by excess capital, right? It gets stuck in other forms of investments. It doesn't move around. And we realize that in order to really improve the lives of the 4 billion people in the fragile populations, to strengthen the lives of the 4 billion people in the working class population, profits must circulate. We need to move that all around. And that's really where the no end philosophy was born. We said, okay, can we create perpetual entities that focus on consumer spending and consumer services and then reinvest all of those profits in communities for